This semi-final wasn't decided by Chelsea. It wasn't decided by pressing, tactics, or quality. Those things had already been neutralized by the state of the tie. What decided Chelsea's last real chance that night was control of something football prefers not to talk about until it's already gone. Time. The clock didn't simply run out. It was managed, slowed, protected. And the first person who understood how to do that wasn't a player, wasn't a coach, wasn't even part of the contest on paper. He wasn't wearing boots. He didn't need to be. January 23, 2013, Liberty Stadium, second leg of the League Cup semi-final. By the time the teams walk out, the tie already has a shape. Swansea City arrive with a 2-goal advantage from Stamford Bridge. Not a fragile lead, a functional one. This isn't a match that needs bravery, it needs discipline. Swansea don't need to stretch the game, they don't need to impose tempo, they don't even need to win the night. They need something far simpler, for the game to keep moving forward without accelerating. Because every minute that passes unchanged tilts the tie further in their favor. Chelsea feel that immediately, not as panic or chaos, but as pressure that doesn't announce itself. They aren't chasing space or patterns, they're chasing the clock. Matches like this quietly stop being about football ideas. Possession becomes cosmetic, pressing becomes selective, risk becomes expensive. What matters is rhythm, how fast restarts happen, how long the ball stays out of play, how often momentum is allowed to breathe. When rhythm is stable, the team in front stays calm. When rhythm fractures, frustration appears, and frustration doesn't arrive all at once. It builds in pauses. The ball goes out of play, no urgency from Swansea, no rush to restart, the clock keeps running, and for the first time that night, football stops being continuous. It hesitates, and in that hesitation, control quietly begins to shift. A 17-year-old ball boy drops onto the ball, not accidentally, not clumsily, deliberately. He doesn't throw it away, he doesn't roll it back, he doesn't hide it behind his body. He shields it. This isn't instinct, it's awareness. He understands something fundamental about the match state. Chelsea need the restart immediately. Every second matters now. Every pause compounds the problem. Swansea need the opposite. They don't need the ball or territory. They need continuity without acceleration. The ball boy becomes part of that equation. Eden Hazard arrives first, not sprinting or panicking, irritated. This isn't about provocation, it's about interruption. Hazard has spent the entire match trying to inject urgency into a game that refuses to speed up. Every touch feels heavier, every action feels slightly delayed, every phase feels like it's running out of time. And now the game has stopped again, not because of a foul or tactical reset, but because of someone who doesn't even belong to the contest. There's no conversation, no appeal to the referee, no attempt to negotiate the moment. He kicks. Not wildly, not recklessly, precisely enough to force the issue. That second isn't childish anger, it's competitive frustration at its most exposed. The moment a player realizes that football pressing, dribbling, movement may no longer be enough to change the outcome. The referee reacts immediately. Red card. Chelsea lose their most decisive player, not because of a tactical error or poor execution, but because control has shifted to a place Chelsea can no longer reach. The tie doesn't mathematically end there, but Chelsea's last realistic window does. The stadium laughs. The crowd understands before the players do. The internet turns it into comedy. Clips loop endlessly. Punchlines replace analysis. But almost no one asks the important question. Not why Hazard reacted, but why that moment had the power to break him. Because that's where football stopped being abstract and became personal. For days, the conversation stayed superficial. Was it provocation? Was it violence? Should Eden Hazard have walked away? Those questions were easy, and they were also incomplete. Football wasn't asking a moral question that night. It was exposing power. The ball boy Charlie Morgan understood something many professionals on the pitch didn't. The match itself was already shaped, the structure was stable, the advantage was secure. But the time wasn't. And in knockout football, time is not neutral. It belongs to whoever knows how to protect it. He didn't influence the game with a pass, a foul, or a tackle. He influenced it where football pretends nothing important happens. Between restarts, between decisions, between the whistle and the ball moving again. Modern football is decided by margins that rarely appear in highlight reels, pressing triggers that don't fire, second balls that aren't contested, half seconds that force rush choices, moments the camera doesn't linger on, moments commentators talk over. This was one of those moments. It didn't change the scoreline, it changed the conditions of the game. Because once rhythm is interrupted often enough, frustration replaces clarity, and frustration makes players reveal limits they didn't know they had. Almost no one recognized that at the time, because football prefers visible causes. Goals, mistakes, red cards. But the truth was quieter. The game didn't break because of the kick. The kick happened because the game had already been taken somewhere. Hazard could no longer reach it, and that was the real revelation. Football did what it always does. When an incident doesn't fit its structure, it moved on. Hazard served his suspension, Chelsea recalibrated, Swansea reached the final and completed the story the competition cared about, the tournament closed its chapter. The system absorbed the disruption and returned to equilibrium, and Charlie Morgan disappeared from the frame. Not dramatically, not unfairly, predictably. There was no academy pathway waiting, no developmental logic to follow, no mechanism for progression, because football only recognizes influence when it fits predefined roles. Player, coach, referee, everything else exists on the edge of the game, tolerated but not tracked. Football has no language for peripheral impact, no metrics for timing outside play, no pathway for understanding moments that don't involve a touch. If you don't act between the lines, the system doesn't know where to place you. So Charlie Morgan became something football understands very well, a reference. For years his name resurfaced, only when the clip did. Detached from context, stripped of meaning, the ball boy Hazard kicked. A moment reduced to a headline, a reaction looped without consequence. That's how football protects itself, by flattening anything uncomfortable into trivia. The game didn't ask what that moment revealed. It asked how quickly it could stop talking about it. And once it was archived, once it became a joke, once it lost analytical value, football was finished with him. But visibility doesn't disappear just because football stops paying attention. It only waits to be used somewhere else. And football has never controlled what happens after that. More than a decade passes. No follow-up story, no redemption arc, no football return. Then the name surfaces again, quietly, unexpectedly, not through a match, interview, or nostalgia, but through business. Charlie Morgan is now a co-founder of Vodka, a premium spirits brand with rapid growth, international distribution, and a valuation reported in the multi-million range. The story re-enters public consciousness from a place football doesn't monitor: boardrooms, markets, brand equity, and suddenly the framing shifts. Former ball boy, now multi-millionaire. Football notices again, not with curiosity, but with surprise. Because this isn't a trajectory the game knows how to map. There's no academy logic behind it, no pathway, no development model. Football didn't produce this outcome. It can't claim it, it can't explain it. What it did produce was something more subtle: visibility. That night in Swansea didn't create wealth, it created recognition without ownership. The game made him known, then discarded the context, assuming the relevance would expire. It didn't. Because once visibility exists, it no longer belongs to football. And when the name returned years later, football wasn't looking at a former ball boy, it was looking at something it didn't expect to see emerge from its own blind spot. That's why the return felt jarring. Not because of the money, but because the game had already decided he didn't matter anymore, and reality disagreed. This isn't a story about luck, revenge, or destiny, it's a story about timing. Football teaches timing relentlessly even when it doesn't say it out loud. When to press, when to delay, when to stop chasing the ball and let the clock do the work. Every match is a lesson in sequence, patience, and understanding when action creates value and when it destroys it. Charlie Morgan didn't make money in that second, he didn't win anything that night. He learned something rarer: how moments actually function, how attention shifts faster than momentum, how pressure builds not through danger but through delay, and how control doesn't always belong to the people doing the most. The pitch taught him something footballers spend careers learning late: that influence doesn't require involvement, only positioning. Modern football runs on attention, narratives, moments that linger longer than goals. That night didn't change his life because it was chaotic. It changed it because it was read correctly, because someone understood where the leverage still lived after the football itself had already run out. That's why 11 years later, that kick still matters. Not because of Eden Hazard or the red card, but because it marked the moment someone understood the game without touching the ball. And football, for all its complexity, still hasn't fully accepted how often that happens. In the seasons that followed, something subtle began to shift, not in headlines or press conferences, but on the margins. Time wasting stopped being treated as theater and started being treated as game control. Referees intervened earlier. Restarts were managed, not ignored. Ball boys were repositioned. Extra balls appeared around the pitch. Delays that once drew laughter now drew cautions. Not because of one incident or one clip, but because football finally admitted something uncomfortable. The margins were being exploited outside the lines. Analysts began reframing the problem not as discipline or sportsmanship, but as rhythm. They stopped talking only about fouls and pressing traps and started talking about interruptions. Moments that didn't look dangerous but quietly reshaped matches. This wasn't about punishing behavior, it was about protecting flow. That night in Swansea didn't rewrite the laws of the game or force a rule change, but it exposed a vulnerability football could no longer pretend wasn't there. So the game adjusted, quietly, reluctantly, and then it moved on. But one person never needed to return to the pitch to use what football had taught him, because the lesson was never about time wasting. It was about understanding when a game is already decided and where the real leverage still lives. And football, even now, is still catching up to that realization.